The sun blazed mercilessly over the New Mexico territory as the stagecoach rattled along the dusty trail toward Albuquerque. Inside, Delilah Crawford pressed a handkerchief to her perspiring forehead, wondering if she had made the gravest mistake of her 22 years by answering that advertisement for a schoolteacher position out west. It was June 1875, and the oppressive heat seemed to mock her proper Eastern upbringing. 3 days of travel had left her exhausted, her once pristine blue traveling dress rumpled, and her carefully pinned chestnut hair threatening to tumble from its arrangement. The other passengers, a silver-haired couple returning from visiting family in St. Louis, and a traveling salesman who couldn't stop talking about his miraculous elixirs, had long since fallen into a drowsy silence. Delilah shifted uncomfortably on the hard seat. Through the window, she watched the landscape transform from sprawling plains to more rugged terrain. Red-orange mesas rose in the distance against the brilliant blue sky, a sight so different from the green forests of Pennsylvania that it might as well have been another planet. "Not much longer now, miss," the driver called down. "Albuquerque's just beyond that rise." A flutter of both relief and anxiety rose in her chest. Soon she would begin her new life, far from the scandal that had driven her from home. The memory of her former fiancé's betrayal still stung, but she had refused to wither away in shame. When she saw the advertisement seeking a teacher for Albuquerque's growing community, it had seemed like Providence. The stagecoach suddenly lurched, jolting her from her thoughts. "Whoa! Steady there!" the driver shouted to his team. Delilah gripped the leather strap beside her as the coach picked up speed. Something was wrong. The elderly woman across from her reached for her husband's hand, fear evident in her eyes. "Driver," the salesman called out. "What's happening?" Through the window, Delilah could see the horses had broken into a full gallop, kicking up clouds of dust. The driver was standing now, pulling desperately on the reins, his face contorted with effort. "The brake's gone," he yelled down. "Hold on tight." Panic surged through the passengers. The coach bounced violently over the uneven ground, gaining momentum as it careened down the slope. Delilah's stomach lurched as they tilted precariously to one side, then the other. The elderly woman began to pray loudly, her words punctuated by gasps as they hit another bump. "There's a bend coming," the driver shouted, his voice strained. Delilah's heart hammered against her ribs as she saw what lay ahead, a sharp curve with a steep drop-off beyond it. The horses, wild with fear, showed no signs of slowing. She closed her eyes, her knuckles white as she clung to the strap. The impact came with a deafening crash. Wood splintered as the coach struck something solid and tipped. Delilah was thrown against the side, then the ceiling became the floor as the stagecoach rolled. Glass shattered, showering her with dangerous shards. The world spun in a chaotic blur of screams and breaking timber. When the motion finally stopped, Delilah found herself pinned awkwardly against what had been the ceiling. The coach had come to rest on its side. Dazed and disoriented, she tasted blood where she'd bitten her lip. Smoke filled her nostrils, acrid and alarming. "Fire!" the salesman shouted, clambering toward the doorway that now faced skyward. The elderly couple was motionless across from her, the woman's arm bent at an unnatural angle. The smoke thickened rapidly, and Delilah could see orange flames licking at the front of the coach where lantern oil had spilled. "Help!" she cried out, struggling to free herself from the tangle of baggage that had shifted during the crash. Her skirts were caught on something, and panic set in as the flames spread with frightening speed. Through the broken window beside her, she suddenly saw a face appear, sun-bronzed and concerned beneath the brim of a dusty hat. A man's voice cut through her fear. "Give me your hand," he commanded. Without hesitation, Delilah reached toward the window. Strong fingers grasped her wrist, and she felt herself being pulled. The jagged edges of the window frame tore at her sleeves as the stranger dragged her out through the opening. The heat from the flames scorched her back as she emerged into the blinding sunlight. The man half carried, half dragged her several yards away from the burning wreckage before setting her down on the ground. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep and steady despite the chaos around them. Delilah looked up into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen. They stood out vividly against his tanned skin and the shadow cast by his hat brim. He was kneeling beside her now, his expression a mixture of concern and urgency. I don't think so," she managed, though her entire body ached. "There are others, I know." He was already rising to his feet. "Stay here." She watched as he ran back toward the stagecoach, which was now engulfed in flames. The driver had somehow escaped and was stumbling away from the wreck, his clothes smoldering. The salesman had also made it out and was rolling on the ground to extinguish the fire on his jacket. The stranger a cowboy, she realized. Noting his worn leather chaps and spurs, tried to reach the door of the coach, but was driven back by the intensity of the flames. He circled around to another window, shielding his face from the heat. "Anyone still in there?" he shouted. There was no response. The fire roared louder, feeding on the dry wood of the coach. Black smoke billowed into the clear blue sky. The cowboy returned to Delilah's side, his face grim. "The older couple?" he asked. She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't think they made it out." His jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw raw emotion flash across his face before it settled back into determined composure. He helped the driver and the salesman over to where Delilah sat, then retrieved his canteen from his horse, a magnificent sorrel stallion that stood calmly despite the nearby inferno. "Drink," he instructed, offering the canteen to Delilah first. She accepted gratefully, the cool water a blessed relief to her parched throat. As she drank, she took stock of her rescuer. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the lean, muscular build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but she guessed he wasn't much older than 30. Dark blonde hair curled at the nape of his neck beneath his hat. "Name's Flynn Keller," he said, taking back the canteen after everyone had drunk. "I was headed into Albuquerque when I saw the smoke." "Delilah Crawford," she replied. I was on my way to take a teaching position there." Something in his expression shifted at her words, but before he could respond, the driver spoke up. "Brake line was cut," he said grimly. "Wasn't no accident." Flynn's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that?" The driver nodded, clutching his burned arm. "Checked everything before we left Santa Fe. Someone didn't want this stage reaching Albuquerque." Delilah felt a chill despite the heat of the day. "Why would anyone do such a thing?" "The mail," suggested the salesman, wiping soot from his face. "Or the strong box. There's always something worth stealing." Flynn's gaze swept the area, alert and wary. "We need to get you folks to town. It's about 3 miles from here." He turned to Delilah. "Can you ride, Miss Crawford?" She nodded, though in truth she'd only ridden placid garden ponies back east. "Yes, I can manage." "Good. You'll ride with me. These men can take turns on my pack horse." He gestured to a laden mule she hadn't noticed before. Within minutes, Flynn had distributed what little belongings they'd managed to salvage. The stagecoach continued to burn, and Delilah couldn't bear to look at it, knowing the elderly couple remained inside. Flynn helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her with an easy grace that spoke of years in the saddle. The closeness of him made her acutely aware of her disheveled state. Her dress was torn and blackened with soot. Her hair had come completely undone, and she was certain her face was streaked with dirt and tears. Yet there was no time for propriety, only survival. As they set off toward Albuquerque, Delilah felt the solid strength of the cowboy behind her, one arm around her waist to steady her as they rode. Despite the horror of the past hour, she felt oddly safe in the embrace of this stranger who had pulled her from certain death. "Thank you," she said softly, "for saving my life." He was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if he'd heard her over the rhythm of the horse's hooves. "Anyone would have done the same," he finally replied, his voice a low rumble she could feel against her back. "No," she said with sudden conviction. "Not everyone would have risked their life for strangers." Flynn said nothing to this, but his arm tightened almost imperceptibly around her waist. They rode on in silence, the smoldering wreckage of the stagecoach receding behind them as the town of Albuquerque gradually appeared on the horizon. The new beginning Delilah had sought now irrevocably altered by fire, tragedy, and the brave actions of a cowboy she'd only just met. Albuquerque welcomed them with a flurry of activity. Flynn rode directly to the doctor's office, a modest adobe building on the main street. Word of the stagecoach disaster spread quickly through the small town, and by the time Delilah had been examined and declared miraculously uninjured save for minor cuts and bruises, a crowd had gathered outside. The town marshal, a stern-faced man named Thornton, questioned each survivor separately about the crash. When Delilah's turn came, she recounted everything she could remember, including the driver's certainty that the brake line had been deliberately cut. "Any idea why someone might target that particular stagecoach, Miss Crawford?" Marshal Thornton asked, scribbling notes in a small book. "None at all," she replied truthfully. "I'm just a school teacher coming to take up a position here." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "The strongbox is missing. Could have been simple robbery, but cutting brake lines isn't the usual method. Typically, road agents just stop the coach at gunpoint." He closed his notebook with a snap. "Well, we'll send a party out to recover the remains and investigate further." After the questioning, Delilah found herself at a loss. Her trunks containing nearly all her possessions had been destroyed in the fire. She had only her handbag with a few dollars and the letter of employment from the town council. "Miss Crawford." She turned to find Flynn Keller standing in the doorway of the doctor's office. He'd removed his hat, revealing thick sandy hair that fell across his forehead. He'd also cleaned up somewhat, though his clothes still bore evidence of the rescue. "Mr. Keller," she acknowledged, suddenly feeling shy under his direct gaze. "I've spoken to Mrs. Holloway at the boarding house," he said. "She's expecting you and says not to worry about payment right away. The town council's been notified of your arrival too." Delilah blinked back unexpected tears at this kindness. "Thank you. I don't know what I would have done." Flynn shifted, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "It's nothing. Small towns like this pull together in times of trouble." He hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about your belongings." "They're just things," she said, though the loss of the few keepsakes from home, her mother's cameo, her favorite books, the quilt her grandmother had made, did hurt deeply. "I'm alive, thanks to you, and that's what matters." A ghost of a smile crossed his features. "If you're feeling up to it, I can escort you to the boarding house." The walk through Albuquerque gave Delilah her first real look at what would be her new home. Despite the circumstances, she couldn't help but be curious. The town was a fascinating blend of cultures: adobe buildings in the Spanish style, alongside more American wooden structures, with signs in both English and Spanish. The streets were busy with a diverse population that included Hispanic families, Anglo settlers, and Native Americans from nearby pueblos. Flynn seemed well known to the townspeople. Several called out greetings as they passed, and he responded with nods and brief words. Delilah noticed he maintained a certain reserve, though not unfriendly. "Have you lived in Albuquerque long?" she asked as they walked. "About 5 years," he replied. "Came out from Texas after the war. You fought in the war between the states. Tail end of it, I was young." His tone discouraged further questions on that subject. "And what do you do now?" "I run a small ranch about 10 miles outside town. Nothing fancy, some cattle, horses I raise and train." Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a tidy 2-story building painted a cheerful yellow. The motherly widow who greeted them clucked sympathetically over Delilah's story and immediately set about making her comfortable. "Lord have mercy, child. Surviving such an ordeal and looking as composed as you do, it's remarkable." She ushered Delilah inside. "Flynn Keller, you're a hero for pulling her out of that fire. Though I'm not surprised, always knew you had the makings of a good man beneath all that quiet." Flynn's ears reddened slightly at the praise. "Just happened to be in the right place, Mrs. Holloway." "Well, come in for some coffee at least, before you head back to your ranch." To Delilah's surprise, Flynn accepted the invitation. As they sat in Mrs. Holloway's cozy kitchen, the older woman bustled about, simultaneously preparing coffee and gathering items for Delilah. "I've got some dresses from my niece who stayed last summer. She's about your size, dear. And toiletries, of course. Oh, and Rebecca at the general store is on the school board. She'll be thrilled you made it despite everything. Such a shame about the Millers, though." They were returning from visiting their daughter's new baby back east. The mention of the elderly couple who'd perished sobered the room. Delilah felt a fresh wave of grief for these people she'd barely known but had shared the final hours of their lives with. Flynn seemed to sense her distress. "Miss Crawford needs rest, Mrs. Holloway," he said gently. "It's been a trying day." Of course." Mrs. Holloway led Delilah to a neat, sunlit room on the second floor. "You sleep as long as you need, dear. Everything else can wait." Left alone, Delilah sank onto the bed, the events of the day finally catching up to her. She hadn't expected to break down, but once the tears started, she couldn't stop them. She wept for the Millers, for her lost possessions, for the shock and terror of the crash, and from sheer relief at being alive. A soft knock at the door startled her. Hastily wiping her eyes, she called, "Yes." The door opened slightly, and Flynn's voice came through the crack. "Just wanted to say goodbye before I head back to the ranch." Embarrassed to be caught crying, Delilah turned away. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Keller." There was a pause, then he said, "I'll be in town again on Saturday for supplies. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Holloway knows how to reach me." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Miss Crawford." His tone was gentler now. "What happened today, it would shake anyone. There's no shame in that." His understanding only threatened to bring fresh tears. "Good day, Mr. Keller," she managed. "Good day, Miss Crawford." After he left, Delilah moved to the window and watched as he mounted his sorrel horse and rode away, his straight-backed figure gradually diminishing in the distance. Only when he had disappeared completely did she realize she'd been holding her breath. The next few days passed in a blur of introductions and preparations. The town of Albuquerque embraced Delilah with warmth and generosity that touched her deeply. Rebecca Wilson, the owner of the general store and school board member, outfitted her with necessary clothing and supplies on credit. The mayor's wife donated books for her classroom. Various mothers invited her to dinner, eager to meet the teacher who would be educating their children. Through it all, Delilah maintained her composure, grateful for the kindness but privately still processing the trauma of her arrival. At night, she often woke gasping from dreams of fire and breaking glass. The sound of horses galloping past the boarding house could send her heart racing. On her third day in town, Marshal Thornton requested to speak with her again. They met at his office, where he informed her that an investigation of the crash site had yielded troubling evidence. The brake line was definitely cut, he confirmed, his weathered face grave. And we found tracks suggesting at least 3 riders were waiting near that bend in the road. When the coach crashed, they likely moved in, took the strongbox, and set the fire deliberately. Delilah's hand flew to her mouth. You mean, it wasn't an accident? The fire was intentional, appears so. Probably to cover their tracks, make it look like the lanterns caused it. But the Millers, she whispered, horrified at the implication. The marshal's expression hardened. Whoever did this didn't care who got hurt. They knew exactly what they were doing. Have you any suspects? She asked. The Vasquez gang has been operating in this territory. They're known for violent robberies. He hesitated. There's something else, Miss Crawford. The driver mentioned that before the crash he saw a rider watching the coach from a ridge, described him as wearing a distinctive red bandana. Is that significant? Could be. Flynn Keller was wearing a red bandana when he brought you all into town. Delilah felt as though she'd been doused with ice water. Surely you can't suspect him. He saved my life. I'm just gathering information, madam. Marshal Thornton's tone was neutral. Keller's a hard man to read. Keeps to himself mostly. Showed up here after the war with no references, not much history he's willing to share. He risked his life pulling me from that burning coach, Delilah insisted, indignation rising. If he had been involved, why would he do that? Could be remorse. Could be he didn't expect the fire to spread so fast. I'm not accusing anyone yet, just investigating all possibilities. The conversation left Delilah deeply troubled. She couldn't reconcile the image of the man who had held her so carefully on the ride to town with someone who could coldly orchestrate such violence. Yet she barely knew Flynn Keller. Could her judgment be clouded by gratitude, by the undeniable attraction she felt toward him? Saturday arrived with a bustling market day in the town plaza. Delilah, who would begin teaching the following Monday, was helping Rebecca Wilson organize donated school supplies when she spotted a familiar sorrel horse tied outside the general store. Her heart quickened inexplicably, and she found herself smoothing her hair and straightening her borrowed dress before she caught herself. What did it matter how she looked to Flynn Keller? Especially now that there were questions about his character. Nevertheless, when he emerged from the store carrying supplies, her eyes followed him. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to physical labor, loading his purchases onto his pack horse methodically. Only when he finished did he look up and notice her watching. For a moment, they simply regarded each other across the plaza. Then Flynn touched the brim of his hat in greeting and began walking toward her. Miss Crawford, he said as he approached, you're looking well, recovered from your ordeal. As much as one can, she replied, studying his face for any sign of duplicity and finding none. His blue eyes met hers openly, if somewhat guardedly. The people here have been very kind. Albuquerque takes care of its own, he agreed. An awkward silence fell between them. Delilah knew she should excuse herself. Propriety demanded it, and the marshal's suspicions suggested caution, but something held her in place. I heard you'll be starting your teaching on Monday, Flynn said finally. The schoolhouse is ready for you. Yes, I visited yesterday. It's a fine building, much nicer than I expected. This town values education. Most of the men here never had much schooling themselves, so they want better for their children. He shifted slightly. I helped with the construction last year, added the bookshelves along the back wall. They're beautifully made, she said, genuinely impressed. You're skilled with woodworking. A faint smile crossed his face. My father was a carpenter before he took up ranching. He taught me. This glimpse into his past intrigued her. Where was that, Virginia originally? Then Texas. His expression closed slightly. That was a long time ago. Before Delilah could respond, Marshal Thornton appeared beside them, his presence instantly creating tension. Keller, he nodded curtly. In town for supplies. As I am every Saturday, Marshal. Flynn's voice had cooled noticeably. Mind stopping by my office before you head back? Got some questions about that Stagecoach incident. Flynn's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. Of course. I'll be there directly. The marshal tipped his hat to Delilah and walked away. She could feel the change in Flynn, the way his shoulders had stiffened, his expression grown more guarded. Is everything all right? She asked. Though she knew it wasn't, Flynn looked down at her, his eyes searching her face. You should be careful about the company you keep, Miss Crawford. A new teacher needs a spotless reputation. The implication stung. Are you suggesting your company would damage my reputation? Some in town might think so. His voice was neutral, but she detected hurt beneath it. Because of suspicions about the Stagecoach robbery, she asked directly. Flynn's eyebrows rose slightly. You've heard those rumors, then? The marshal mentioned that the driver saw someone with a red bandana watching the coach before the crash. Understanding dawned in his eyes. And I was wearing a red bandana when I brought you to town. He gave a bitter laugh. Half the cowboys in the territory wear red bandanas, Miss Crawford. I don't believe you had anything to do with it, she said firmly, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Something flickered in his expression, gratitude, perhaps, or relief. That's good to hear. But Marshal Thornton needs to follow every lead. I understand that. Will you tell me why he seems to regard you with particular suspicion? Flynn hesitated. That's a conversation for another time, perhaps. I should go see what the marshal wants. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Crawford. Good luck with your students on Monday. As he walked away, Rebecca Wilson appeared at Delilah's side, her expression concerned. Be careful with that one, dear, she said quietly. Flynn Keller's got secrets. Most folks in town like him well enough, but there's a reason he keeps to himself out at that ranch. What reason? Delilah asked. Rebecca glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. He rode with a rough bunch during the war, not regular Confederate Army. Guerrilla fighters. They did terrible things, from what I've heard. After the war, some of them turned to outright banditry. She lowered her voice further. There are those who wonder if he ever truly left that life behind. Delilah thought of Flynn's gentle handling as he'd pulled her from the burning coach, the respect with which he'd treated her afterward. It didn't align with the picture Rebecca painted. He saved my life, she said simply. Rebecca patted her hand. And we're all grateful for that. Just be cautious. You're new here, and your position requires certain standards of behavior. The warning rankled, but Delilah merely nodded. She had come west for a fresh start, to establish herself as a respectable teacher. Getting entangled in controversy, or with a man of questionable background, would undermine everything she hoped to build. Yet as she watched Flynn Keller's tall figure disappear into the marshal's office, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, nor the certainty that there was more to his story than rumors and suspicion. The question was whether she should heed the town's warnings or trust the instincts that told her Flynn Keller was a good man, regardless of his past. The schoolhouse bell rang bright and clear on Monday morning, calling the children of Albuquerque to their lessons. Delilah stood at the door in her most professional attire, a sensible navy dress with white collar and cuffs, her hair neatly pinned up, welcoming each student with a warm smile. 27 children in total, ranging from 6 to 15 years of age, filed into the one-room schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with curiosity. Teaching provided blessed distraction from her tumultuous thoughts. The routine of lessons, the children's eager or, in some cases, not so eager faces, the challenge of organizing multiple grade levels, all of it required her complete attention. By the end of the first week, she had established herself as firm but fair, winning over even the most reluctant students with her genuine interest in their progress. She heard nothing more about Flynn Keller during this time, though she found herself looking for him whenever she walked through town. According to Mrs. Holloway, he rarely came to Albuquerque except for his Saturday supply runs, preferring the solitude of his ranch. The marshal had apparently questioned him about the Stagecoach robbery, but had not detained him, suggesting there was insufficient evidence for an arrest. On her second Saturday in town, Delilah deliberately lingered near the general store around midday. Her rational mind told her she was being foolish. What respectable woman sought out the company of a man with such a questionable reputation? Yet something deeper compelled her, some instinct that insisted she should form her own opinions rather than rely on town gossip. Her patience was rewarded when the now familiar sorrel horse appeared at the far end of the street. Flynn rode with the easy grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. He dismounted outside the general store, securing his horse before retrieving a list from his pocket. Delilah realized she'd been staring only when he looked up and caught her eye. For a moment, he seemed to hesitate, then he touched the brim of his hat and approached her. "Miss Crawford," he greeted her, "I hear you've made quite an impression at the school." "The children are wonderful," she replied, pleased that he'd heard positive reports. "Eager to learn and full of interesting questions. Children usually are when given the chance." There was something wistful in his tone. "I was sorry to miss your first day." Had some trouble at the ranch that needed tending. The fact that he'd considered attending her first day of teaching warmed her unexpectedly. "What sort of trouble?" A shadow crossed his face. "Found one of my best horses dead. Shot." Delilah gasped. "That's terrible. Was it an accident?" "No." His jaw tightened. "Horse was in the far pasture. Someone shot him deliberately." "But why would anyone do such a thing?" Flynn's blue eyes met hers directly. "A warning, most likely, or revenge." "For what?" He glanced around, noting the curious glances from passers-by. "Not a conversation for the middle of the street. Would you consider riding out to see my ranch tomorrow, Sunday afternoon?" The invitation took her by surprise. It was highly improper for an unmarried woman to visit a bachelor's home alone, especially one with Flynn's reputation. Yet she found herself nodding. "I would like that," she said, then hastily added, "as an educational excursion. I've been telling my students about different livelihoods in the territory. It would be helpful to see a working ranch firsthand." A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes at her transparent attempt to justify the visit. "Educational. Of course. I could send one of my ranch hands to escort you after church if that would be more appropriate." "That would be ideal," she agreed, relieved at this concession to propriety. Flynn nodded. "Miguel will meet you at the boarding house at 2 o'clock. He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I'm looking forward to it, Miss Crawford." The simple admission sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "As am I, Mr. Keller." The next day, after the morning church service, where Delilah noted Flynn's absence with disappointment, she changed into her most practical outfit for the ranch visit. She was plaiting her hair into a simple braid when Mrs. Holloway knocked at her door. "There's a young man downstairs for you, dear. Says Mr. Keller sent him." Miguel Ortiz proved to be a cheerful youth of about 17, clearly proud to be entrusted with escorting the new teacher. He helped Delilah mount the gentle mare Flynn had sent for her, then led the way out of town. "How long have you worked for Mr. Keller?" Delilah asked as they rode. 3 years, Miss Crawford. He gave me a job when no one else would." Miguel's expression was openly admiring. "Best boss I ever had. Treats everyone fair, works alongside us instead of just giving orders. The ranch has many workers. Just 4 of us full-time, plus extra hands during roundup and branding. It's not the biggest spread, but the horses Mr. Keller raises are special. He has a way with them like nobody else." Their route took them through increasingly rugged country, mesas rising in the distance and scrubby vegetation dotting the landscape. After about an hour, they crested a hill, and Miguel pointed proudly. "There it is, the Flying K." Below them stretched a modest but well-maintained ranch. A sturdy log house with a wide porch formed the centerpiece, with several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures extending around it. A small stream wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. Several horses grazed in the nearest pasture, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun. As they approached, Delilah saw Flynn emerge from the barn. He'd clearly been working. His sleeves were rolled up, and there was a smudge of dirt on his forearm, but he'd made an effort to clean up, his hair damp as if freshly washed. He helped her dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Welcome to the Flying K, Miss Crawford." "It's lovely," she said sincerely, taking in the peaceful setting. "I can see why you prefer it to town." Pride flickered across his features. "It's not much compared to some of the big outfits, but it's mine, built most of it myself. That makes it all the more impressive." Flynn gave Miguel instructions to see to the horses, then offered Delilah his arm. "Would you like a tour before we talk?" The next hour passed pleasantly as Flynn showed her around the ranch. He was clearly in his element here, relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in town. His pride in what he'd built was evident as he explained his breeding program for the horses, the improvements he'd made to the original homestead, and his plans for expansion. They ended the tour at a small hilltop behind the house, where a lone cottonwood tree provided shade. A simple wooden bench had been placed to take advantage of the view, which stretched for miles across the New Mexico landscape. "This is breathtaking," Delilah said as they sat. "Do you come here often, when I need to think?" Flynn's gaze swept across his land. "When I first came to this territory, I'd ride out for days, searching for the right place. The moment I saw this valley, I knew this was it." "You wanted a fresh start," she observed. He looked at her sharply. "Yes, I imagine you understand something about that." The perceptiveness of his comment surprised her. "What makes you say so?" "Young women from good Eastern families don't generally travel alone to remote territories for teaching positions unless they're leaving something behind." Delilah considered deflecting but found herself wanting to be honest with him. "My fiancé betrayed me with my closest friend," she admitted. "The scandal was significant in our small community." Flynn's expression softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. That kind of betrayal cuts deep." "Yes, it does. But in a way it was a blessing. It forced me to reconsider what I truly wanted from life." She met his gaze directly. "I've never regretted coming west despite the dramatic entrance." A smile tugged at his lips. "Dramatic is one word for it." They fell silent for a moment, the peaceful sounds of the ranch surrounding them, horses nickering in the distance, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the call of a hawk circling overhead. "You wanted to tell me something," Delilah finally said. "About why someone might have killed your horse as a warning." Flynn's expression grew serious. "Yes." He took a deep breath. "I need you to understand some things about my past first. You've likely heard rumors in town." "That you rode with guerrillas during the war," she acknowledged. "That some became outlaws afterward." He nodded grimly. "I was 17 when I joined Quantrill's Raiders. young, angry, convinced the Union had wronged my family by taking our farm in Virginia. His voice was steady but tinged with regret. I won't justify what we did. It was a brutal time, and we did brutal things. Delilah listened without judgment, sensing how difficult this confession was for him. After the war, I wanted nothing more to do with violence. Some of the men I'd ridden with turned to robbery, rustling continuing the only life they knew. The Vasquez gang that Marshal Thornton suspects in the Stagecoach robbery. Their leader, Javier Vasquez, served with me under Quantrill. Understanding dawned. That's why the marshal suspected you might be involved. Yes, I've worked hard to build a new life, but my past follows me. Flynn's blue eyes held hers intently. I need you to believe me when I say I had nothing to do with that robbery. I would never endanger innocent lives that way. I believe you, Delilah said without hesitation. But why kill your horse? What message were they sending? Flynn's expression hardened. When I saw the smoke from the stagecoach and realized what had happened, I recognized Javier's methods. The cut-break lines, the fire to cover evidence it was his signature. After I brought you all to town, I tracked them to their camp and confronted Javier. You confronted them alone? Delilah asked, alarmed at the thought. We were brothers in arms once. I thought he might listen to me. Flynn shook his head. I told him targeting a public stagecoach crossed a line, that innocent people had died. I warned him that if he didn't leave this territory, I'd go to Marshal Thornton with what I knew. And the dead horse was his answer, Delilah concluded. Yes, a warning that next time it might not be a horse. He looked away. I'm sorry to involve you in this, but I wanted you to understand. And to be careful. Javier knows I pulled you from that coach if he thinks you matter to me. The implication hung in the air between them. Delilah should have been frightened, but instead she found herself fixating on his words. If he thinks you matter to me. Do I? She asked softly. Matter to you? Flynn's gaze returned to her face, intense and unguarded. More than is sensible, Miss Crawford. More than is proper, given your position and my reputation. Her heart quickened at his honesty. Perhaps you should call me Delilah then, if we're setting aside propriety. A smile touched his lips, transforming his solemn features. Delilah, he said, as if testing the feel of her name, and I'm Flynn. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. For a brief, breathless instant, Delilah thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stood and offered his hand. I should get you back to town before dark. People will talk enough as it is. As they rode back toward Albuquerque, Miguel tactfully riding some distance ahead, Delilah found herself reluctant for the day to end. Flynn had shared his troubled past with her, trusted her with the truth. In doing so, he'd become more than the heroic cowboy who'd saved her life. He was a complex man seeking redemption, building something honest from a history of violence. When they reached the outskirts of town, Flynn slowed their pace. I won't be coming to Albuquerque for a while, he said. It's safer for everyone if I stay at the ranch until this situation with Vasquez is resolved. Disappointment washed over her. How will it be resolved? Marshal Thornton's forming a posse. They'll try to track the gang. He hesitated. I've agreed to help. I know how Javier thinks where he might hide. Fear clutched at Delilah's heart. That sounds dangerous. It is, but it's my responsibility. His expression was resolute. I brought Javier into my life. I need to be the one to end his threat to this community. They had reached the boarding house. Flynn dismounted and helped Delilah down, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Please be careful, she said, looking up at him. I will. His blue eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. When this is over, perhaps we could speak again, about things that matter. She understood his meaning perfectly. I would like that very much. Flynn surprised her then, taking her hand and raising it to his lips. The brief contact sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "Goodbye, Delilah." As she watched him ride away with Miguel, Delilah knew with sudden clarity that despite the danger, despite his past, despite the town's warnings, she was falling in love with Flynn Keller. And there wasn't a thing she could do to stop it. The following weeks were among the most challenging of Delilah's life. By day, she threw herself into teaching, earning the respect of parents and the adoration of her students. By night, she worried about Flynn, wondering if he was safe, if the posse had found Vasquez's gang, if she would ever see him again. Rumors traveled through town the posse had tracked the outlaws into the mountains. There had been a shootout at an abandoned mine. Marshal Thornton had been wounded. It was impossible to separate fact from fiction, and Delilah's anxiety grew with each passing day. 3 weeks after her visit to the Flying K, Delilah was walking home from school when she noticed unusual activity at the doctor's office. Several horses were tied outside and people hurried in and out with grim expressions. Her heart clenched with foreboding. Rebecca Wilson intercepted her before she could investigate. "You shouldn't go over there, Delilah. It's not a sight for a lady. What's happened?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. The posse returned. They found Vasquez's hideout and there was a terrible gunfight. Rebecca hesitated. 3 of the outlaws were killed. 2 of our men were wounded, Ben Taylor and Flynn Keller. The world seemed to tilt beneath Delilah's feet. "How badly?" "Ben's got a bullet in his shoulder. Flynn." Rebecca's expression softened with sympathy. "He took a bullet to the chest. It's not good, Delilah." Without another word, Delilah pushed past her and ran toward the doctor's office. Propriety be damned, she needed to see Flynn, needed to know if he. The scene inside was chaotic. Dr. Adams was working frantically over Flynn's still form on the examination table, his hands bloody as he probed for the bullet. Marshal Thornton stood nearby, his own arm bandaged, his expression grim. 2 other men from the posse sat slumped against the wall, exhaustion evident in their postures. "Miss Crawford, you shouldn't be here," the marshal began, moving to block her view. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "I need to know if he's going to survive." Something in her tone must have revealed her feelings, for the marshal's stern expression softened slightly. "Doc's doing everything he can. Keller saved my life out there, drew Vasquez's fire when the bastard had me dead to rights." He shook his head. "Never seen a man so determined. After he was shot, he still managed to take down Vasquez before he collapsed." A groan from the examination table drew their attention. Flynn had regained consciousness, his face contorted with pain as the doctor extracted the bullet. "Got it," Dr. Adams announced, dropping the bloody projectile into a metal basin with a clink. "Missed his heart by less than an inch, if it had been any closer." Delilah pushed past the marshal, unable to restrain herself any longer. "Flynn," she whispered, moving to his side. His blue eyes, clouded with pain, found her face. Recognition dawned, followed by confusion. "Delilah, you shouldn't be here." "Hush," she said, taking his hand. "Save your strength." "Vasquez?" he asked weakly. "Dead," Marshal Thornton confirmed from behind her. "You got him, Keller." The gang's finished. Relief washed over Flynn's features before his eyes fluttered closed again. "He needs rest now," Dr. Adams said firmly, and stitching up, "Miss Crawford, I must insist you leave." "This is no place for a lady, and there will be talk, let them talk," she replied, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I'm not leaving him." The doctor exchanged glances with the marshal, who shrugged. "Your reputation, Miss Crawford," the doctor warned, "is less important to me than being here," she finished. Her gaze returned to Flynn's unconscious face, pale beneath his tan. "Please let me stay." Perhaps it was the quiet determination in her voice, or perhaps the doctor was simply too tired to argue. Very well. But stay out of the way while I finish. Delilah retreated to a corner of the room, watching as Dr. Adams skillfully closed the wound. Throughout the procedure, Flynn remained mercifully unconscious, though occasional grimaces of pain crossed his features. When the doctor had finished, he turned to Delilah. "He'll need careful tending for several days. The risk of infection is high." "I'll help," she offered immediately. "Miss Crawford, you have your students to consider. I can arrange for a substitute," she interrupted. "This is more important." The doctor studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You care deeply for him." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes, I do." "Then perhaps you should know when they brought him in, barely conscious and bleeding heavily, your name was the only word on his lips." That night, after the doctor had shown her how to change Flynn's bandages and what signs of infection to watch for, Delilah sat beside his bed in the small back room of the doctor's office. She had sent word to the school board requesting a substitute for a few days, citing a medical emergency. Mrs. Holloway had brought clean clothes and necessities, her expression a mixture of concern and disapproval. "People are talking, Delilah," the older woman had warned. "A respectable teacher doesn't spend nights at a man's bedside, no matter the circumstances." "Then I suppose I'll have to be less respectable," Delilah had replied calmly. "Flynn saved my life, Mrs. Holloway. I won't abandon him now." As midnight approached, Flynn stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. He seemed disoriented at first, his gaze wandering the unfamiliar room until it settled on Delilah. "Am I dreaming?" he asked hoarsely. "No," she smiled, reaching for his hand. "I'm really here. You shouldn't be." Despite his words, his fingers curled around hers. "Your reputation is already compromised, according to Mrs. Holloway." Delilah lifted a glass of water to his lips, helping him drink. "Besides, I find I care far less about what people think than I once did." Flynn managed a weak smile. "Becoming a rebel, Miss Crawford." "Perhaps you're a bad influence, Mr. Keller." His expression sobered. "Vasquez is really dead." "Yes, and his gang either dead or captured. You're being called a hero in town." Flynn closed his eyes briefly. "Not a hero, just trying to make things right." "The marshal told me you saved his life. He would have done the same." Flynn shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "How long have I been here?" "Since this morning. The doctor says you'll need to stay at least a week, possibly longer." Concern flashed across his face. "The ranch, Miguel and your other hands are taking care of everything," she assured him. "Miguel rode out as soon as they brought you in. He said not to worry, that they know what needs doing." Relief softened Flynn's features. "Good men, all of them." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You look tired." "I'm fine," she insisted, though exhaustion did pull at her. "You should go home, get some rest." "I'm staying right here," she replied firmly. A complex emotion flickered in his blue eyes, gratitude mixed with something deeper. "Why?" The simple question demanded an honest answer. Delilah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Because I care for you, Flynn, more than I should, perhaps, given the short time we've known each other." She looked down at their joined hands. "When I heard you'd been shot, I realized I couldn't bear the thought of losing you." The confession hung in the air between them. When Flynn didn't immediately respond, Delilah felt a flash of embarrassment. Perhaps she'd misread his feelings, mistaken gratitude for something more. She started to withdraw her hand, but Flynn tightened his grip, preventing her retreat. "I rode out with that posse for 2 reasons," he said quietly. "To stop Vasquez from hurting anyone else, and to ensure he could never threaten you." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Every day I was away, I thought of you. Every night I dreamed of coming back to you. Joy bloomed in Delilah's chest, warm and bright. Then I'm exactly where I should be. Flynn's gaze held hers, intense despite his weakened state. People will talk. The school board might not want a teacher who's associated with someone like me. Then they'll need to find another teacher, she said simply. Though I think you underestimate how much opinions have changed since you brought Vasquez to justice. Delilah, he murmured, her name a caress on his lips. You deserve better than a man with my past. I deserve a man with your heart, she countered. Your past shaped you, but it doesn't define you. The man who pulled me from that burning coach, who built a ranch with his own hands, who risked his life to protect this town, that's the man I've come to love. Flynn's breath caught at her declaration. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words, overwhelmed by emotion. Then he tugged gently on her hand, drawing her closer to his bedside. I never expected to find someone like you, he said, his voice rough with feeling. Never thought I deserved that kind of happiness. But if you'll have me with all my flaws and scars, I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of your love. I'll hold you to that promise, she whispered, leaning down to press her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, mindful of his injured state but filled with promise. When she pulled back, Flynn's eyes shone with a happiness that transformed his entire face. Now rest, she instructed. The sooner you heal, the sooner we can decide what happens next. Flynn's recovery progressed steadily over the following days. As his strength returned, so did visitors' ranch hands checking on their boss, townspeople expressing gratitude for his role in ending Vasquez's threat, and even Marshal Thornton, who arrived with unexpected news. The governor's office is sending a commendation, he announced gruffly. Apparently taking down Vasquez has made you something of a territorial hero, Keller. Flynn, propped up in bed and looking considerably better than he had days earlier, seemed uncomfortable with the recognition. I didn't do it for recognition. No, you did it for her, the marshal replied, glancing meaningfully at Delilah, who sat nearby mending one of Flynn's shirts. And for redemption, I'd wager. Flynn didn't deny it. Does this mean you'll stop watching me like I might revert to my outlaw ways any minute? The marshal actually smiled. Let's say I've revised my opinion. Man willing to take a bullet to protect others has proven where his loyalties lie. He extended his hand. You've earned my trust, Keller, and my thanks. The handshake between the two men symbolized more than just reconciliation. It represented Flynn's full acceptance into the community, the final shedding of suspicions that had followed him for years. After a week in the doctor's office, Flynn was deemed well enough to be moved, though still far from fully recovered. The question of where he would convalesce provoked considerable debate. He needs to be at the ranch, Miguel insisted. That's his home. He needs proper care, Dr. Adams countered. The ranch is too isolated if complications arise. In the end, it was Mrs. Holloway who provided the solution. He can stay at the boarding house, she declared, surprising everyone. I have a ground floor room that would suit, and I've nursed enough sick relatives in my time to know what's needed. Her eyes twinkled as she added, besides, it would be more proper than the current arrangement, with Miss Crawford spending all her time here. At least at my establishment, appearances can be maintained. And so Flynn was carefully transported to the yellow boarding house, installed in a sunny room that opened onto the back garden. Delilah resumed her teaching duties, but spent every afternoon and evening at his side. Mrs. Holloway, despite her initial concerns about propriety, proved a staunch ally, deflecting gossip with the formidable authority of a woman who'd been a pillar of the community for decades. Let them talk, she told Delilah privately. I've watched how he looks at you and how you care for him. That kind of devotion is rare. My Harold looked at me the same way for 30 years before the Lord took him." Her eyes misted with memory. "Don't let other people's narrow minds stand in the way of happiness, my dear." As Flynn's strength returned, he and Delilah spent hours in conversation, filling in the gaps of their lives before that fateful day of the stagecoach crash. He told her about his childhood in Virginia, his family's struggles during the early years of the war, his misguided decision to join Quantrill's raiders, and his determination to build something honorable afterward. She shared stories of her upbringing in Pennsylvania, her passion for education, and the painful betrayal that had sent her west. "I should thank your former fiancé," Flynn remarked one evening as they sat in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "If he hadn't been fool enough to throw away his chance with you, you'd never have come west. And I'd have been trapped in a life that was too small," Delilah agreed. "Sometimes what seems like disaster is actually the beginning of something wonderful." Flynn took her hand, his touch now familiar and cherished. "Like a stagecoach crash, precisely." She smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that terrible day. "Though I don't recommend it as a way to meet eligible bachelors." Flynn laughed, the sound rich and carefree in a way it hadn't been when they first met. The burden of his past, while not erased, sat lighter on his shoulders now. 3 weeks after the shootout, Dr. Adams pronounced Flynn well enough to return to the Flying K, though with strict instructions to avoid strenuous activity for at least another month. The night before his departure, Flynn asked Delilah to walk with him in the garden. The evening was perfect warm, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of Mrs. Holloway's roses. Fireflies blinked like earthbound stars among the plants. They stopped beside the small fountain that burbled peacefully at the garden's center. "I've been thinking about the future," Flynn said, his expression serious in the fading light. "So have I," Delilah admitted. "I'll be returning to the ranch tomorrow." "I know." She'd been dreading the separation, though she understood his need to get back to his home, his work. "The thing is," Flynn continued, "it won't feel like home anymore." He turned to face her fully. "Not without you there." Delilah's heart quickened. "Flynn, I know it's soon," he said quickly. "Too soon by most standards. And I know I should court you properly, call on you with flowers and take you to socials, and all the things respectable couples do. But we've never been entirely respectable, have we?" she observed with a small smile. He returned the smile briefly before his expression grew earnest again. "When I was lying in that gully with Vasquez's bullet in my chest, certain I was going to die, I had only one regret, that I hadn't told you how completely I've fallen in love with you." Delilah's breath caught at the naked emotion in his voice. "I don't want to waste another day without you knowing that," Flynn continued. "Or another day not showing you." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to abandon your teaching, I know how much it means to you, but I am asking if you might consider becoming my wife. We could work out the details. You could teach during the week and come to the ranch on weekends until the school year ends. Or I could stay in town part-time. Or—" Delilah silenced his nervous planning by rising on her tiptoes and pressing her lips to his. Unlike the careful kiss they'd shared during his earliest days of recovery, this one was full of promise and passion. Flynn's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Delilah looked up at him with shining eyes. "Yes," she said simply. Joy transformed Flynn's features. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, we'll work out the details. Yes to everything." Flynn lifted her off her feet in an exuberant embrace, his previous injuries apparently forgotten in his happiness. Delilah laughed as he spun her once before setting her down and capturing her lips in another kiss. "From the kitchen window, Mrs." Holloway watched with a satisfied smile before discreetly drawing the curtains to give the young couple privacy. The wedding took place 6 weeks later on a perfect October day. The entire town of Albuquerque turned out for the celebration, which was held on a flower-decked meadow at the Flying K. Marshall Thornton served as Flynn's best man, while Rebecca Wilson stood as Delilah's matron of honor. Miguel and the other ranch hands had outdone themselves preparing the property, and Mrs. Holloway had coordinated a feast that would be talked about for years to come. Delilah wore a gown of ivory satin ordered from back east, with lace that had belonged to her grandmother. Flynn, looking surprisingly comfortable in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on the arm of Mayor Wilson, who had offered to stand in for her absent father. Their vows were simple but heartfelt, exchanged beneath an arch of autumn wildflowers with the backdrop of the New Mexico mountains behind them. "I never believed in fate," Flynn said, his voice clear and strong as he held Delilah's hands, "until a burning stagecoach brought you into my life. You saw past my mistakes to the man I was trying to become. You gave me the courage to finally leave the shadows of my past behind. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you for all the days of my life." Tears glistened in Delilah's eyes as she responded. "I came west seeking a new beginning, never imagining it would begin with disaster and lead to such happiness. You saved more than my life that day. You showed me what true courage and honor look like. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to build our future together, and to love you completely, today and always." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from the assembled guests. Even the schoolchildren Delilah taught had been given a special holiday to attend, and they threw flower petals with enthusiastic abandon. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music, dancing, and more food than even the substantial crowd could consume. As twilight settled over the land, Flynn led Delilah away from the festivities to the hilltop where they had first truly opened their hearts to each other. "Happy, Mrs. Keller?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist as they looked out over their land. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his chest, "though I think some of my students are going to have trouble calling me by my new name." "They'll adjust," Flynn chuckled, just as the town adjusted to the scandalous idea of their schoolteacher marrying a former guerrilla fighter. "Former guerrilla fighter and current hero," she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "Don't forget that part." He kissed her tenderly. "The only heroic thing I ever did was pull you from that stagecoach. Everything good in my life came from that moment." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky above the Flying K, Flynn and Delilah Keller stood wrapped in each other's arms, grateful for the twist of fate that had brought them together through fire and danger, to find a love neither had expected but both would cherish for the rest of their days. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted up the hill to where Delilah sat beneath the cottonwood tree, a book open but forgotten in her lap. From her vantage point, she could see Flynn in the corral below, leading their 4-year-old son Daniel on a gentle pony, while 2-year-old Thomas watched with wide-eyed fascination from the safety of Miguel's arms. The Flying K had prospered in the years since their marriage. Flynn's reputation as a horse breeder had spread throughout the territory, and the ranch had expanded to include more land, more cattle, and several new buildings. The original house had been enlarged to accommodate their growing family, with a spacious schoolroom added so Delilah could continue teaching not just their own children but several from neighboring ranches as well. She smiled as Flynn lifted Daniel from the pony and set him on his shoulders, the little boy's delighted squeals carrying clearly on the afternoon breeze. Thomas immediately began reaching toward his father, demanding equal treatment, and Flynn obligingly swung him up to join his brother. With a child balanced on each shoulder, he started up the hill toward Delilah, his stride sure despite his playful burden. As she watched them approach her husband and sons bathed in golden New Mexico sunlight, Delilah's hand drifted to her stomach, where a new life had just begun to make its presence known. She hadn't told Flynn yet, waiting for the perfect moment to share the news that their family would be growing again. Perhaps tonight, she thought, when the boys were asleep and they had the quiet evening hours to themselves. Flynn had built a beautiful porch swing where they often sat watching the stars, talking about their day and their dreams for the future. It would be the perfect place to tell him about their third child. "Mama," Daniel called as they drew closer. "I rode Thunder all by myself." "With Papa's hands right there the whole time," Flynn clarified with a grin. "I saw," Delilah replied, rising to meet them. "You're becoming quite the horseman, just like your father." "Me too," Thomas insisted, not to be outdone by his older brother. "You too, little man," Flynn agreed, carefully lowering both boys to the ground. "In another year or so." As the children immediately began a game of chase around the tree, Flynn pulled Delilah into his arms, greeting her with a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days. "Missed you," he murmured against her lips. "I've been right here the whole time," she reminded him with a smile, too far away. His blue eyes, as vivid as ever beneath his hat brim, studied her face with loving attention. "You look beautiful today, especially beautiful." Delilah wondered if he somehow sensed the change in her. Flynn had an almost uncanny ability to read her moods and anticipate her needs. It was one of the countless things she loved about him. "I was just thinking about how blessed we are," she said, nestling against his chest. "How perfect our life has become." Flynn's arms tightened around her. "From disaster to happiness," he said, echoing the words from their wedding vows. "Who would have thought a stagecoach crash could be the best thing that ever happened to us?" Delilah looked up at her husband, this man who had once pulled her through a window to safety, and in doing so had opened a door to a life more fulfilling than she could have imagined. "I think perhaps it was always meant to be," she said. "That somehow, someway, we would have found each other." "Maybe so," Flynn agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "But I'm grateful every day that we did." As the sunset painted the western sky in brilliant hues, the Keller family made their way back to the ranch house together. The boys ran ahead, eager for the dinner Mrs. Perez, their cook, had promised would include apple pie. Flynn and Delilah followed more slowly, arms around each other's waists, savoring the peaceful moment. The stagecoach that had brought them together had long since been reduced to ashes and memory. From that fiery beginning had risen something beautiful and enduring, a love that had healed old wounds, created new life, and promised to burn bright for all their days to come. And in that moment, with her family around her and the future stretching bright before them, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most devastating crashes could lead to the most beautiful journeys, if only you were brave enough to take the hand reaching through the flames to pull you toward something better than you ever dared to dream.